Audiobook, The Worst Business. My Journey from Dependence and Mediocrity to Independence and Prosperity. By Milco Baute. Written in the year 2022. Introduction. In this book, I take a journey through my professional and financial history so that the reader can learn how to set goals and achieve them, regardless of how circumstances appear or what situation they may be facing. All it takes is learning, having a plan, a passion, staying focused, not losing enthusiasm, continuing to fight and trusting in God. Strive in what you love, work hard, and be courageous. Start with whatever you have, without waiting for everything to be in your favor or to turn out exactly as you wish. Failures and mistakes are lessons, they are the moments when we mature and refine our skills. I hope you learn the lesson I have learned. I am not rich, nor am I close to being so, but I feel free because I enjoy full freedom in its three forms: spiritual freedom, freedom of expression, and financial freedom. It took me 40 years to achieve my goal of becoming economically independent, suffering through poorly paid jobs that I didn't even like. While everything in life requires sacrifice, and we cannot always do what we love or are passionate about due to debts, time constraints, lack of knowledge, and limited resources, there is always a way to generate passive income. This allows us to pay our bills and debts so that we can ultimately do what we love, even if it doesn't generate profit. The worst business. The worst business one can engage in is working for someone else's business, that is, working for companies, corporations, and institutions. In other words, exchanging time for money by working a set schedule for a salary. This type of work will never lead to economic independence or financial freedom because it binds you to schedules, regulations, efficiency expectations, productivity goals, punctuality, and availability, even for overtime when necessary. It is a form of slavery that has been programmed into us for centuries. In fact, work itself is a curse, not a blessing, as many believe. The Bible states this in Genesis 3 verses 17 to 19. Then to Adam he said, "Because you have heeded the voice of your wife, and have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, You shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground for your sake, in toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return." Understanding the concept of work. Everything that involves movement is work. In physics, work is defined as the force applied to an object to move it from one point to another. When force is applied, potential energy is transferred, overcoming resistance. In economics, work refers to the hours people dedicate to producing goods or services. It is one of the fundamental factors of production, along with capital, land, and technology. It involves human effort in the production and sale of goods and services. However, many tasks go unrewarded or unpaid because not all work is done for money. This includes volunteer work and daily household responsibilities like driving, picking up children from school, cleaning, cooking, mowing the lawn, and helping others. All of these require effort and time, which makes them work. We are designed to work, so work itself is not bad. Our bodies, our vehicles in this physical dimension, on this planet Earth, are built to move, with necessary rest and pauses. Movement is life. Our heart is a machine that never stops, it only slows down when we sleep to help us rest and restore energy. That's why daily physical exercise is crucial. It oxygenates the body, providing vitality, and extending the lifespan of the heart. This is especially important for people whose jobs don't involve physical effort. Two types of work in economics. Physical work. This refers to manual labor or strength-based activities, such as agriculture, construction, and manufacturing. Intellectual work. This involves mental effort and creative contributions, such as brand design, writing, composing research, and scientific work. The measurement and control of these two types of work differ. Physical work is usually measured by the quantity produced and is supervised directly. Intellectual work, however, is harder to measure because it involves ideas and applying theoretical and practical knowledge. Control over intellectual work is also more indirect, as workers are expected to contribute independently. Yet, working as a profession or trade is a form of bondage, designed to steal our time and economic independence. If you depend on the service or time you give to a company, you are dependent on that company. The best way to work is to work for yourself. But how do you achieve this? The path to independence. The key to independence is learning as many skills as possible. The more you learn, the more income-generating opportunities you can create. How do we become independent? By selling or offering what we have learned, made, or acquired. This involves a process that may be slow or aggressive, depending on how well you promote yourself and the quality of your service. Because if you don't advertise, you don't sell, and if you don't sell, you don't earn. If you learn a trade, advertise it and offer it. Your first satisfied client will recommend you, and that is the most important part, quality and satisfaction, so that your business grows to the point where you need to hire others. If you have a relative, close friend, or neighbor who needs to earn extra money, train them to help you. Hiring a professional costs money, not just for their time but for their expertise. In my case, since I do various things, I hire people with experience, even those with skills I don't possess, and I pay them more than I earn. If they do the work, I only get a percentage because the business and clients are mine. After learning and trying various jobs and experimenting with different businesses, including corporate, home-based, investment, and online businesses, some successful and other failures, I can say that time lost cannot be recovered, but money comes and goes. Money does not belong to anyone, it is merely a public use tool. By the time I turned 50, I finally achieved what I had set out to do. Some people accomplish their goals quickly after migrating or starting their journey, but for me, it took over 20 years. However, I have seen many who achieved financial independence or bought property quickly, only losing it all later, ending up in debt, divorced, sick, or losing their business. The difference for me was that I built a home first before buying a house. I secured a residual income before quitting my job or relying on an employer. I did not invest in a house until I had a solid foundation and a stable family. I don't criticize those who take risks in buying property, but a house comes with debts and expenses. At that time, I couldn't afford to lose it due to insufficient and unstable income. We may not be able to change the world, but we can change our world, our environment, and that makes all the difference. The power of leverage. No one gets rich working for someone else, and the wealthy do not achieve success alone. Success requires strength, push, and the power of others. In financial terms, this is called leverage. It is the only way to build and maintain wealth today. This is why corporations merge to survive crises, this is called corporate mergers. It is the safest way to withstand financial crises, economic depressions, and recessions. More importantly, it is the only way to move forward and build a fortune. Knowledge is more valuable than gold. Without knowledge, one cannot generate or sustain wealth. Personal growth and self-improvement are more valuable than mere physical labor. To succeed, we must be willing to listen, learn, and seize opportunities. The world is evolving, and we must evolve with it. If we fail to move forward, we will only grow poorer. The rich get richer, and the poor get poorer, the difference lies in mindset and action. If we want to prosper, we must learn from those who succeed and break free from mediocrity and fear. Doing the same thing every day without achieving different results will only lead to the same outcomes, nothing will change. Many great men achieved success simply by doing things differently, not by going with the flow. One may be born poor involuntarily, but dying poor is a voluntary choice. If destiny exists, rest assured that only you have the power to change it. People drown due to panic and fear, not because they don't know how to swim. To avoid drowning in deep waters, one doesn't need to swim but rather to float, and we all can float. Swimming is for moving forward, not for staying afloat. Do not follow the current mediocrity, living in constant fear, distrust, and selfishness, or you will drown in economic crises. Crises only arise to push us to change the way we do things, to evolve, to update ourselves, and to prepare for change. The world is in continuous transformation and development. We never move backward, only forward. If you don't have what you want or need, it's because you haven't sought it, you haven't informed yourself, and you continue to cling to outdated ways of doing things. Progress requires change. Start changing the way you do things, and you will see better results. Wisdom, vision, and preparedness. I do not consider myself an intelligent person, although, as it is written, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Therefore, it was a wise decision on my part to surrender my life to God and follow Christ, my Savior. Outside of God, intelligence, wisdom, and love are futile, for God is love. Although I do not consider myself intelligent, I do see myself as a visionary, someone who is awake, a futurist who identifies opportunities and takes action before circumstances change, worsen, or before an opportunity is lost. Moreover, if a cautious man is worth 2, then a cautious man like me is worth 1,000. God has given me the eagle's vision to see beyond what is right in front of me, beyond the horizon, beyond time itself. I only wish I were as intelligent as many who do not use their intelligence to prepare for the future or start building it now. If I had, I would have already founded an empire or at least established a larger legacy. Knowledge and intelligence are useless if one lacks skill and the ability to seize opportunities. Practicality over theory. For instance, in my profession as an electrician, which I practiced for 30 years and still do occasionally, I have met many colleagues who are more intelligent and knowledgeable than I am, some even hold degrees and qualifications that I never attained. However, because the profession of an electrician, like most trades and professions, values practice over theory, since practice is what develops skill, I often outperformed my more knowledgeable colleagues in meeting the expectations of our supervisors. These colleagues have not had as much success, if we can call it that, as employees because they believed that knowing more entitled them to do things their way. But when you work for someone else, a company, obedience and efficiency are more important than intelligence or expertise. Employers care little about an employee's knowledge, they prioritize efficiency and discipline. They prefer workers who follow instructions and complete tasks quickly because time is money, and speed is crucial. However, speed without skill leads to failure, as rushed work often results in mistakes. In my case, I fared better than my colleagues because I was skilled and did my work well, exactly as requested. In 2006, when an economic recession loomed, the company I worked for began laying off employees, reducing its workforce from 300 to fewer than 100. I was among the last to leave, not because I was fired, but because my wife was about to give birth, and at that time, we were living in Peru. I had to leave the company to travel and be with my family. The importance of thoughtful decision-making. The same principle applies to human relationships, marriage, friendships, partnerships, and business relationships. Often, we get carried away by emotions rather than analysis, driven by our need to be valued, loved, to transcend, and to improve ourselves. However, we must be more analytical because when emotion surpasses reason, many mistakes are made. One must analyze not only the present but also the future of any endeavor, considering how, with whom, the advantages and disadvantages, to avoid being caught off guard and losing momentum, and minimizing expenses. Leadership and the risk of short-sighted decisions. This also applies to leadership. Many make mistakes they later cannot fix because they only consider the present moment, failing to anticipate setbacks, difficulties, and crises. They focus solely on profits, ignoring potential losses. I have personally made such mistakes multiple times, but I have learned from them. That's why I am now more cautious when taking risks. I prefer to continue as I am, with my trade and business rather than experimenting with new ventures. My vision is not driven by ambition but by independence. Not every wealthy person is independent. I have managed to be independent without being rich or possessing a fortune. The fear of failure. I am an open-minded person, so I do not fear failure. Failure can be a step toward success, teaching and preparing us better. Failure is not an obstacle, it is a lesson. Likewise, death is not the end but a transition. If more people had less fear of death or illness, they would live longer and healthier lives. The danger of debt and poor planning. I have met people who bought houses, properties, businesses, or invested in equipment and tools before their business even bore fruit. Investment is necessary, time, money, and resources, but one must have a plan and work with what is available because debt is a curse and a double-edged sword. I have friends who bought houses while their relationships were unstable. The ego often inflates possessions, leading to conflict, breakups, divided assets, and the loss of everything they built. This happens because they built their homes on sand, human emotions and decisions, rather than on rock, the Bible or Christ. Without strong principles, without a biblical foundation, there is no stability. Advice for couples. My advice to couples: seek God first, entrust yourselves to Him, pray together, grow spiritually through His Word, and apply what you learn. Love each other without expecting anything in return and forgive one another. In disagreements, one of you must yield. It is good to defend your opinions and claim your rights, but the husband must be wise, leading the household while yielding when necessary, so long as it does not go against God's principles. Mistakes in church leadership. I have also seen God's servants, honest, dedicated pastors, fall into debt, believing their congregation would be sufficient to cover expenses. They miscalculate, assuming their tithing members and future attendees will sustain them, not considering future financial crises, job instability, or health issues. Many churches do not grow because they focus on entertaining their members with concerts, events, and banquets rather than fellowshipping with other Christian congregations or performing miracles. Churches that only collect funds without making disciples stagnate. True growth comes from training disciples and sending them to preach or establish new congregations. The future starts now. To summarize, it is better to be visionary, skilled, and future-oriented. Plan, have a backup strategy, and take action without waiting for ideal conditions. The future starts now. When I wrote my first book, The Path to Financial Freedom, I was still dependent on a job. My colleagues laughed at me and questioned how I could write about economic independence while being an employee. But I was already working on my independence in my mind, and in my free time, I was planning everything. By the time I wrote that book, I was already independent, though I earned very little. That's why I decided to move to Peru when the U.S. recession began in 2007. I lived there for almost 4 years without depending on a fixed job. In Peru, I met my wife and had my 2 children before returning with them to the U.S. in 2011. Financial freedom was not easy. I had to try different things and experiment with unfamiliar ventures. At first, I started with a simple investment. I moved to Peru with my savings, $5,000, and rented a house with a garage for $250 a month. Upstairs, I lived with my wife, her parents, and her younger sister, while downstairs, I converted the garage into a gaming lounge. I bought several PlayStations and televisions. After obtaining a license, we officially opened the business from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. However, I soon realized that the income was not enough to cover rent, electricity, water, internet, and phone services. So, I purchased 10 computers with furniture to offer internet service by the hour. Unfortunately, that still wasn't enough, as my monthly expenses exceeded $500 at that time. We decided to sell everything, and with the money I was able to recover, I invested in the foreign exchange market, Forex. But since I had no prior experience in this field, had never invested before, nor used a virtual stock platform, I decided to do it through a trader. In the end, it turned out to be a pyramid scheme. My journey in Forex trading. When I first entered the world of investments, I made more than I lost. Before the Forex platform shut down, I had turned my $3,000 investment into $9,000. By the time the business collapsed, I had accumulated $12,000. From my investment and the accumulated interest, I withdrew $300 per month while reinvesting the rest of my daily earnings. I followed this strategy for 9 months, ultimately making almost $9,000, a decent profit for the first attempt. I then tried investing with other traders, but I lost more than I gained. Eventually, I gave up on Forex and started a network marketing business. Returning to conventional work. In the end, after getting married and having 2 children, I had to return to conventional work to provide for my family. However, I never gave up on the idea of achieving financial freedom. I continued working toward that goal with Plan B, Plan C, and various strategies for generating both linear and residual income. The internet is the perfect tool for any entrepreneur, but businesses that you can control yourself are far more efficient than those involving unknown intermediaries. After learning from my mistakes and losses, I decided to avoid network marketing, multi-level marketing, or online financial investments. Instead, I chose to work directly in the real estate business, using available apps to attract clients and generate income from property rentals. Additionally, I leveraged my acquired knowledge and skills to diversify my income streams. My trades and services. The following are my current jobs, activities, trades, professions, and ways of generating income. It's not that I have multiple talents or skills, I don't even have a doctorate, but I am an entrepreneur who loves learning and is willing to offer services based on the knowledge I have acquired. My true profession, the only one I studied for 4 years, is as an electrician. 1. Electrician. Although I work for companies in both Cuba and the U.S., today I work as a freelance electrician. I broke free from the constraints and mediocrity of underpaid jobs, or seemingly well-paid jobs that still required adherence to schedules, regulations, restrictions, and company policies. Now, I no longer work for others, others work for me and directly for customer satisfaction. While I do deal with contractors, I am not their employee. The client pays me, and I set my own prices. 2. Trainer. Although I don't do this frequently, I have not abandoned it. My knowledge has value, and if I can help others learn what I know and improve their skills, to become independent or earn higher wages, I teach them and earn income from my time and service. When I say trainer, I mean that I train electricians, my trade since 1986, using a course I created, complete with a book and videos. I offer this training in person at my home, at clients' locations, and online. 3. Tax preparer and accountant. I did not study this as a profession like I did with electrical work, but I learned how to do it for myself and helped my older brother file taxes every year since 2005. By learning to do taxes online, using free websites, I saved money by not having to pay someone else to do it. Then I realized that if I helped others, I could charge for my time and service. Today, I always have clients, some new, others returning, providing me with extra income at the beginning of each year. 4. Writer. This is not a profession but a vocation, inherited or acquired from my late father, who was also a writer, filmmaker, and editor. I developed a passion for writing by composing essays, articles, opinions, and analyses. Although I am a writer because I publish my own works, I don't consider myself a writer in the traditional sense. I see myself more as a disseminator of truth, reason, and reality, covering topics such as politics, religion, spiritual matters, philosophy, economics, and motivation. I don't consider myself a writer because I don't rely on imagination but rather on information and lived experience to educate rather than entertain. I have never written novels, short stories, or historical documents, though I once intended to write movie scripts, something I have yet to learn due to time and health constraints. 5. Editor and publisher. Much like learning to file my own taxes saved me money, learning to publish my own books allowed me to avoid outsourcing. After publishing my first 2 books online, I realized I could also help others publish theirs and charge for my time and service. Since 2006, I have turned this into an extra business. Today, I collaborate with professionals who design, translate, and proofread manuscripts, which I then format, edit, and publish. Since 2006, under the name Baute Production Publisher, we have published over 160 books from more than 60 authors on Amazon and other online bookstores. This job, along with writing, consumes most of my time, as I work on it every day, whether on my books or others, despite earning less than I do as an electrician. Many people don't understand this. They assume that because I often work from home, I am not doing anything. But this is actually the most exhausting job I currently have, both physically and mentally. 6. Rental business, short-term and long-term. I call it room rentals because I am neither an investor nor a realtor, though I did invest my savings into the property my wife and I purchased. We built and converted a section of our house into 2 separate units. The first was a 1-bedroom studio with a kitchen, bathroom, dining area, and closet, within a space of less than 100 square feet, originally a utility room. Since there was existing plumbing, I relocated the washer and dryer to a separate storage house in the backyard and transformed the utility room into a fully functional rental unit. I currently rent this space through Airbnb. Once that studio was complete, with the help of a friend for walls, flooring, cabinets, plumbing, my wife for painting, and my own electrical expertise, I purchased an RV, camper trailer. I spent $5,200, plus taxes and title transfer, to park it on my property, install plumbing, and make improvements such as fixing the bathroom floor and roof and buying a sofa bed and mini fridge. Both the studio and RV have been generating our primary income since March 2021. 7. Other trades and income streams. I have also engaged in investing, cryptocurrency and forex, selling on eBay, promoting wellness and household products, earning royalties from my 68 published books. Although these sources provide small earnings, they accumulate over time, adding hundreds of extra dollars annually. I also tried Uber for a while but stopped due to chronic pain, which makes prolonged sitting uncomfortable. 8. Unpaid work and daily responsibilities. In addition to my income-generating activities, I also perform unpaid tasks such as washing linens and towels for my Airbnb rentals, cleaning and maintaining the rental units, gardening and yard maintenance, ordering books for authors I have published, lending money electronically to people in Cuba, interest-free, helping others when I can, not for self-glory but because being useful is fulfilling. I do everything with passion, love, and dedication. Perhaps that's why I prosper, because I know many who work for others but fail to seek knowledge, invest, or start their own businesses. I refuse to waste my time, I choose to invest it wisely. I always keep myself busy doing something necessary or useful, even if it doesn't earn me money, because work is not solely about making money, nor is money only earned through work. Everyone works in one way or another, even those considered lazy. Simply spending hours sitting, standing, or walking around begging for food or perhaps even for drinks on a street corner, intersection, or public place is, in itself, a form of work. Many people invest and generate income even while they sleep. Others, such as writers, like me, musicians, composers, producers, etc., earn residual income after publishing their work. In my case, although I cannot rely entirely on this income, I feel satisfied knowing that people read what I write with love and passion, something that takes time but continues to generate earnings for life, even beyond my passing. Since I have over 60 published works, I receive monthly royalties when my books are purchased worldwide. This money continuously enters my bank account, which is jointly held with my wife and children. Anyone who thinks I don't work, that I work little, that I depend on the government, or that my work is easy is completely mistaken. I work every day, without taking a single day off. I work more than 8 hours a day, I work in pain, which requires double the effort compared to someone with full energy who can perform physically demanding jobs. I work harder than most people around me and, most likely, earn more, though I do not make money from everything I do. For me, work is neither an obligation nor a necessity, it is a pleasure, just like traveling or eating. Frankly, I prefer working, even if it's writing, over going out, visiting friends, or receiving visitors because time is crucial and a treasure that must be wisely invested. Writing, sharing ideas, reading, and educating myself make me feel more useful than engaging in leisure activities, outings, social visits, or meals. However, I am not a hermit. I enjoy socializing, traveling, meeting new people, sharing, and spending time with my family. I don't like staying at home all the time, not even when I am tired and in pain, because I want my children to enjoy their childhood and youth. Even if it requires physical effort and enduring my pain, I prefer them to experience life outside rather than being confined at home, unable to explore, learn, and grow. The difference is that I choose my own schedule and work. My childhood. I had a difficult childhood, being the youngest of 3 boys and the son of divorced parents. My mother was a strong and hard-working woman who sacrificed a lot to support her family. She taught me how to be an entrepreneur, not through talent, knowledge, or acquired skills, but by showing me how to increase productivity by doing multiple things at once. She demonstrated that, in addition to holding a regular job to secure a fixed salary, average people like us could sell, resell, trade, or negotiate to make extra income. I still remember my childhood in the 1970s, watching my mother work tirelessly to stand out and meet the revolutionary goals imposed by the Cuban regime. She attended mandatory workplace meetings, since all businesses belonged to the state, and put in extra effort to be recognized as an outstanding worker. By doing so, she earned household appliances, essential items in any home, that the Castro dictatorship had convinced the people had to be earned through labor and commitment to the revolution instead of simply being purchased with money. She won fans, a radio, a blender, a washing machine, and a television, all Russian-made, since, during the 1970s and 1980s, Cuba was entirely dependent on the Soviet Empire. I also remember the endless lines, sometimes lasting days or even weeks, where people slept outside stores just to buy shoes, toys, or necessities that could be easily purchased anywhere else in the world, whether in a developing or industrialized nation. This highlights the unmatched misery of Cuban socialism, a system that deceives the world with its false claims of social equality when, in reality, it enforces socialism for the people and capitalism for the state. Yes, Cuba offers free healthcare, but without resources, efficiency, or medicine, and salaries for healthcare workers are miserably low. Education is also supposedly free, but Cubans pay for it their entire lives through salary deductions, forced volunteer work, and mandatory social service. The only medical services that receive quality resources are those catering to foreign tourists and international healthcare programs. Hunger and misery as a control mechanism. Hunger and poverty under socialist or communist regimes are not accidental, they are strategic. Tools for control. The government ensures that people remain dependent on the state, forcing them to comply to receive even basic necessities. Hunger keeps people preoccupied with survival, preventing them from organizing, protesting, or having the energy to fight back. This is the harsh reality of Cubans, and God is my witness. Let me clarify that our problems are not due to a U.S. economic blockade. The only real blockade in Cuba is the one imposed by the government against its own people. The U.S. has maintained an embargo, which restricts Cuba from trading with American businesses, as a consequence of the Cuban government expropriating U.S. companies after the Castros took power. My first steps in business. As a child, I helped my mother sell homemade flavored ice, peanuts, and even dry macaroni with salt, which resembled peanuts or pork rinds. In Cuba, people buy, sell, and trade everything. Later, as an adult, I assisted my mother in purchasing, reselling, and negotiating beauty products when she ran a home-based business after retiring. In the 1990s, we also resold homemade alcohol, shrimp, lobster, cheese, and ham. My mother raised and supported 3 boys on her own, which forced her to become a natural businesswoman, as her regular job was never enough to cover even a week's worth of expenses. I also recall times when she had to trade her rationed cigarettes, allocated by the Cuban government's food rationing system, for cookies, milk, rice, or other essentials. Lessons from scarcity. Growing up with scarcity and hardship taught me to value things more, take care of what I have, and stretch every dollar to make it last through the month. It gave me the financial discipline to cover all necessary expenses without waste. In Cuba, it is impossible to survive solely on a job salary. That has been true in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and even today. The reason is simple: socialism does not work. Socialist ideologies do not evolve, do not offer basic individual freedoms or family well-being, and instead focus on victimization, repression, control, limitations, and destruction. It doesn't matter if socialism is left-wing, center-left, progressive, liberal, fascist, or globalist, it is the same dog with a different collar, just under a different name. Immigrating to the United States. In 1990, my mother applied for U.S. citizenship through my grandfather, who was born and raised in Key West, Florida, and passed away in Cuba in the 1970s. However, her request was denied by the U.S. government at that time. In 1995, after obtaining all necessary documents and my grandfather's original birth certificate, she reapplied and was finally granted U.S. citizenship in February 1995. The moment she received her U.S. passport, she petitioned for her 2 unmarried sons, my older brother and me, to immigrate since my second brother was already in the United States. By September of that year, my brother Rolando and I received immigrant visas for the U.S., and on December 10, 1995, we finally left Cuba, thanks to God, my mother, and my grandfather Rogelio, who sadly never saw his grandchildren grow up as he passed away in his early 60s. My work and business life in Cuba. After graduating in electrical energy systems in 1986, I was forcibly recruited by the Cuban government into the mandatory military service. I was only 17 years old and lost nearly 2 years in that useless military training, which was nothing more than another stage of indoctrination. My salary was only 7 Cuban pesos per month, the equivalent of $0. 30 US dollars for the entire month. The only good thing I can remember from that experience was the great friends I made, some of whom I still keep in touch with today, even though they still live in Cuba. In mid-1988, at 20 years old, I took a 1-month course to become an electrical inspector, which was only available to graduates of the institute. After completing the course, I started working at a branch of the electric company in Guanabacoa, Havana. From there, I was transferred to Regla, the town where I grew up. Although my salary was very low, starting at 148 Cuban pesos and later increasing to 171 pesos per month, my experience in that job was the best I had in my working life. My role as an electrical inspector. My job was to inspect electric meters and identify any electrical anomalies in residential and commercial areas. Some consumer complaints were resolved in the office, where I explained why their electricity costs had increased, usually due to a new appliance, the summer heat, or a meter reading error, which would typically correct itself the following month. I was also responsible for detecting electricity theft, a very common practice in Cuba where one consumer would illegally tap into another's electricity supply. If a meter was defective, I either replaced it myself or filed a report for replacement. My first job was enjoyable, engaging, and fulfilling. I liked helping people and holding electricity thieves accountable. However, every job has its unpleasant aspects, and in my case, I hated when I had to cut off people's electrical service and seal their meters to prevent tampering, sometimes even locking them with a padlock. When electricity was cut off due to non-payment, it didn't bother me as much, because all services come at a cost. However, when I had to cut off power to consumers who exceeded the government-imposed consumption limit, it felt unfair and unreasonable. People should be allowed to consume as much electricity as they want as long as they pay for it. After traveling to 8 different countries, both in the developing and developed world, I have never seen anything like the restrictions imposed in Cuba. That was the reason why I resigned from the electric company in the 1990s. At that time, I was working in the Cerro municipality in Havana and had already spent 3 years in that role. From the electric company to photography. For 2 years after leaving the electric company, I worked in public school maintenance, a low-paying and monotonous job, earning the same 174 Cuban pesos per month, equivalent to $25 at the time. I later worked in the electrical energy distribution dispatch center in Havana, where my schedule was 24 hours of work followed by 48 hours of rest. These 24-hour shifts without sleep were exhausting and boring, but they came with great responsibility, as I was in charge of instructing substation operators to open and close electrical circuits on the streets where electrical workers were performing maintenance, sometimes while hanging from poles. I only stayed in that job for a few months before quitting, as I had no interest in continuing. Instead, I took 4-month courses in photography and cinematography. Although the cinematography course was just an interesting learning experience, the photography course became my path to independence. By learning technical skills and buying a camera, I started working for myself, taking photos at birthday parties, Sweet 16, weddings, portraits, and passport photos. This earned me far more money than my job at the electric company as a technician and inspector, while only working once or twice a week. Struggling through the special period. When things became extremely difficult in Cuba during the special period, a severe economic crisis caused by the collapse of the Soviet Union, Cuba's main provider, I returned to work at the electric company, this time in Alomar, Havana, where I lived before leaving for the U.S. However, I only stayed for a year as an inspector at that branch. I left due to a dispute with a coworker. In my youth, I didn't tolerate arrogance or mistreatment from anyone, and if I didn't like something, I walked away without explanation. However, this mindset changed after moving to the United States, where quitting a job impulsively is not an option. One must endure challenges to secure a paycheck and pay the bills. Becoming a businessman in Cuba. After leaving the electric company in Alomar, I started selling my photography equipment, which my brother had sent me from the Soviet Union. I initially used this equipment to set up a darkroom and print my own photographs, which allowed me to increase my earnings beyond just taking pictures at events. Instead of just taking photos one day and delivering them the next, I could now handle the entire process and make more money. However, the misery and scarcity in Cuba were so extreme at the time that we were starving. I had to sell my photography equipment and even my bicycle, which I had earned as a work reward from the electric company. In Cuba, not everyone was allowed to own a bicycle, they were only distributed through state-controlled workplaces, and even though they had a price, the government trained the people to believe they had to earn everything through a commitment to the socialist revolution. After selling my belongings, I traveled to the countryside to buy rice, potatoes, and chicken for food. On the return trip, I had to carry a 100-pound sack using trucks, buses, and even walking part of the way home. Building a business from nothing. After ending my photography career, I became a negotiator, buying, reselling, and distributing goods. I worked with suppliers who gave me merchandise on credit so I could sell it and pay for it later. At home, we also sold homemade alcohol, attracting many customers since our neighborhood, Alomar, was filled with high-rise apartment buildings, for 12-story buildings with 144 apartments each, plus additional 4- and 5-story buildings nearby. This area was known as Alomar because of its large residential population. My mother, who had also quit her government job, opened a clandestine hair salon in our apartment on the 6th floor. She had many clients, some of whom also bought our homemade rum. This business became our main source of income for a while, allowing us to survive and move forward after leaving our low-paying government jobs. We continued these small home-based businesses until 1995, when we finally left Cuba for the United States, the land of my maternal grandfather, and the dream of so many people worldwide. That dream took 5 years to achieve, starting from the moment my mother began her U.S. citizenship process through her father. Looking back, I spent more time making a living through independent business ventures than I ever did working conventional jobs in Cuba. My work life in the United States. When we arrived in the United States in December 1995, we initially stayed at my Aunt Migdalia's house, my mother's older sister, who had been living in the U.S. since the 1950s, before Fidel Castro took power. My mother was the first to start working, taking a job at a Hispanic restaurant called La Margarita, located just a few blocks from my aunt's house. Meanwhile, my older brother Rolando and I applied for jobs at factories nearby, and we were called to start working by January 1996. My mother gave her entire paycheck to my aunt, while my brother and I gave her half of what we earned, even though it wasn't much. At that time, the minimum wage in Florida was $4.15 per hour, but my brother and I were making $5 per hour. After 2 or 3 months, I switched to the night shift, earning $0.50 more per hour at Tropical Sportswear International, a factory that finished and packaged jeans and sportswear. I worked the night shift, earning $5.50 per hour, where I learned to operate forklifts and order selectors, industrial lifts, and I even obtained a forklift license. My job consisted of unloading boxes arriving at the factory, placing them in the corresponding bins, organizing, and cleaning. My shift ended at midnight. Life on a low salary in the 1990s. Despite earning little, it was enough to make ends meet and even save some money. To give an idea, renting a room only costs $200 per month. Groceries could be bought for $20. Gasoline was $0.88 per gallon. Health insurance costs between $25 and $30 per month. We started working in factories because they were the closest jobs to our home and the fastest to obtain. We walked about 1.5 miles to work every day, just as my mother did to get her job. This wasn't a problem for us because, in Cuba, we were used to walking 10 to 20 kilometers daily. Public transportation in Cuba was unreliable. Buses took 4 to 5 hours to arrive, and when they did, they were so overcrowded that they didn't stop, leaving people hanging from the doors. Moving out and becoming independent. After 3 months of living at Aunt Migdalia's house, my mother and I moved out to rent an apartment, and later, rent a house. Eventually, we moved back to my aunt's house, but this time, we lived in a studio apartment, like an efficiency unit, that she had been renting to a tenant who had moved out. This studio had a private entrance separate from the main house. From factory work to mental health care. After leaving the factory, I got a job at a mental health and rehabilitation center, thanks to a church friend who worked there as a counselor. They trained and certified me as a mental health technician, where I cared for patients with mental disorders, depression, and psychological conditions. Later, I helped my mother get a job there as a housekeeper, cleaning staff. While I monitored and assisted patients, she was responsible for cleaning the facility. At this job, I earned $6.25 per hour. Switching jobs to increase my salary. I increased my wages by changing jobs, rather than waiting for annual raises. After 6 months, we moved on to work for the Hillsborough County School Board, public schools, in cleaning and maintenance, earning $6.75 per hour. At the schools, I was responsible for cleaning classrooms, maintaining gardens, and even painting decorations. At elementary school, the science teacher asked me to paint stars and planets on black curtains for a cosmos class. Her idea was to hang the curtains on the walls and ceiling, using glow-in-the-dark paint, and add luminescent stars to the ceiling. During the lesson, she would turn off the lights, and the painted curtains would simulate outer space for the students. At that time, holograms and 360-degree projectors didn't exist, so this was a creative way to enhance learning. Exploring other jobs, Golden Corral and New York. While living at my Uncle Gilberto's house, my mother's older brother, who had also moved to the U.S. in the 1950s. I paid $200 per month for my mother's and my room, totaling $400 per month. Since Golden Corral Buffet was nearby, I applied for a job and was hired in the bakery and pizza section. My tasks included making pizzas and banana pudding, serving desserts, washing dishes and cleaning. I don't remember my exact salary, but it was probably less than $7 per hour. At Golden Corral, I realized that restaurant work was not for me. I was only suited for eating at restaurants, not working in them. Later, I moved to New York for a few months, staying with my other brother and his wife, as I wanted to explore the city. At that time, my brother worked as a waiter at a 3-story Italian restaurant called La Maganetta. I also worked there as a waiter, but I quickly discovered that this was not my field. I was not skilled at memorizing food orders, and my English was not fluent enough yet. Some jobs require natural abilities, and no matter how much effort or enthusiasm you put in, they aren't meant for everyone. I am not good at cooking, food service, or hospitality, and I found the work boring. However, waiters in high-end restaurants can earn well, especially with tips in a prime New York City location. In 2 days of work per week, I made up to $500, which was more than my weekly earnings in Florida at the time. Returning to Florida and factory work. After returning to Florida, I worked at a mini-blind factory in Tampa, where I learned to operate metal cutting machines, earning $7 per hour. Later, I worked at a roof truss factory, where I operated a forklift and transported wooden planks for cutting. This was a 12-hour shift job, from Monday to Friday. The factory operated 24/7, closing only on weekends. My shift was at night, and I earned $7.50 per hour. At this time, I had already married my first wife. After 6 months, I quit because the job was too physically exhausting. I then worked as an air conditioning installation assistant, earning about the same wage. However, I didn't last long because the work was extremely demanding, especially when replacing AC units in attics or underhouses. I got covered in dirt and sweat daily. I lost 3 to 4 pounds per day from spending hours in the attic heat. Frustration and searching for a better path. Although I learned new skills, these jobs never fulfilled me. I felt like a slave to the system, working only to pay off debts and bills in order to survive. I often worked 12 to 14 hours per day, earning a bit more but never improving financially. I felt frustrated and miserable because none of these jobs brought me satisfaction or financial stability. Entering the construction industry as an electrician. After working in various jobs that I had never done before and never studied for, I decided to enter the construction industry as an electrician's assistant. This was the closest I could get to my actual career, which I had studied for 4 years in Cuba. Of course, I had not studied electrical work for construction, and the U.S. electrical code was completely different from those in Latin American countries, especially in Cuba, where everything is a disaster. I started working for $7 per hour in a company that built houses, apartments, and commercial properties. That was my school in the U.S., where I learned to wire, install, and connect many things. I stayed with that company for 2 years, but I took it easy, no overtime, with no extra effort. Since they never gave me a raise, sometimes I skipped work or arrived late. People shouldn't expect the best from me if they don't value me. Expanding my electrical work in construction. From that company, I moved on to many others, working in construction for about 15 years. After working for 1 or 2 years in different companies, I learned the American electrical codes and how construction, renovations, wiring, and installations were done in the U.S., at least in Florida. Then, I became independent and started working for myself. By that time, I already had some clients who called me occasionally. I solved electrical problems, did new installations, and wired additions, and even started painting houses and commercial properties. I am not a handyman, but whatever I can do, I do it without fear. In my case, I prefer to master one skill rather than be an amateur in many. Between electrical construction companies, electrical service companies, and temp agencies that hired me for temporary construction jobs, I worked for more than 15 different companies. Some companies I even returned to after resigning. The best job I had in electrical construction. The best time I spent doing electrical construction work was with Joe Glogger, a man who owned his own company, but it was just him and me. I worked with him for about 5 years in Tampa and nearby counties. Joe even gave me an old RV for free, so I could fix it and live in it to be closer to the jobs we had in Pasco County. At the time, I didn't have the resources to rebuild it, but looking back, I regret not taking it because I could have repaired it and sold it later. Back then, I lived in a nice apartment in Tampa, and I really didn't like the idea of living in a trailer. Salary growth and the 2007 economic recession. In the construction companies I worked for, I started earning $7.50 per hour in 1997 and reached $26 per hour by 2007. I worked in both Central Florida and South Florida, Hialeah, gradually increasing my salary. However, the 2007 economic recession hit hard, and wages dropped drastically. At that time, I realized I was about to lose my job because the company that paid me the best salary was leaving Florida and laying off employees little by little as projects were completed. So, I decided to go out on my own, gathered $5,000, and moved to Peru. First, I visited to explore opportunities and see what I could invest in. Later, I returned for longer stays, as I was already living with my wife, who in 2008 gave birth to our first daughter. My experience in Peru. Peru was the perfect place to escape the 2007 economic recession. There, I met Pilar, and with her, I had 2 children in Lima, the capital. In Lima, I invested $1,500 to establish a business. $1,500 for 6 months' rent. $1,500 as a financial reserve. My girlfriend, now wife, Pilar, suggested that I invest in a liquor store, which we could run from the house we were renting. However, I didn't like the idea, even though I now admit that she was right. It would have been the ideal business in a city where men drink beer instead of water, and many women do, too. Not that everyone was an alcoholic, but a liquor store would have been much more profitable and always in demand. I know this because I had one in my house in Havana, Cuba, and customers were always flowing in. I believe a liquor store would be successful in any city worldwide. But instead of listening to Pilar, I chose to open a video game arcade. Starting a video game business. I bought 5 PlayStations and an Xbox from the US and bought TVs, wall racks, and chairs in Lima. Before setting everything up, I paid for the business license, permits, and inspections, because I wanted it to be an official and legal business. Since I grew up in Cuba learning to negotiate to survive, I became a businessman and entrepreneur, always dreaming of being independent. Many people think that to start a business, you need a lot of money, but you can start a business with little or no money. All you need is an idea, motivation, perseverance, the courage to start. A small capital is indeed necessary, but you can get it through a loan, not necessarily with your own money. However, to get a loan, you need to build reliable credit, which takes time. In my case, I saved the capital to start a business in a foreign city, where there were many more people, especially children and teenagers, who didn't have the luxury of owning video games, computers, or expensive devices like in the US. Challenges of running the business. Since the profit came from hourly rentals, I charged 1 Peruvian sol per hour, $0.67 at that time. If the house or location had been ours, owned by Pilar or her parents, the business would have been more profitable. However, since we were renting both the house and the garage, I had to cover rent with the business revenue and still make extra money for our needs. That was my plan, but my calculations were wrong. Even though the arcade was sometimes full, it wasn't full all the time, and I only had 6 gaming stations. So, I had to expand. I bought 10 computers with private cubicles to offer internet services and turned the business into an internet cafe and gaming arcade. I rearranged the space to put video games in the back with a private entrance. The front area became an internet cafe. The 10 computers and cubicles cost me $1,000. But again, this was a mistake. The internet cafe was another hourly service, charging the same rate, 1 sol per hour, or $0.67. Why the business wasn't profitable? The business was not a failure, but it wasn't profitable either because I had set it up in a rented house and had to pay rent. Additionally, in Peru, electricity, phone, and internet services were expensive. To get internet, I was forced to get a landline, which was not necessary in the US or other countries. After 6 months, I lost a PlayStation due to theft. I struggled to cover expenses, as I wasn't making even 100 sols per day, $30 at that time. Had monthly expenses over $500. So, I decided to sell everything, but at a loss, since I couldn't sell the equipment for the original price. Final setback and moving to Forex trading. I had a conflict with the house owner, Pilar's cousin, who moved one family into the garage and constantly hosted noisy parties. I had paid 6 months rent up front, which was my biggest mistake because we had to leave early and lost that money. By then, my daughter was born, and we had no peace in that place. With the money from selling the equipment, I invested in the Forex market, trusting a trader in Peru, despite the risks of online investments. I knew it was risky, but I had to try something to make money and secure my family's future. This was another experience that allowed me to live for 2 years without necessarily depending on a job. However, I traveled back to the US occasionally just to earn some extra money and return to Lima with my family. On one of those return trips, my brother Alex, who lived in Philadelphia with his wife and daughter, paid for my ticket from Lima to Philadelphia so I could help him build his house. He had purchased a floor in a commercial building that had been converted into a residential space. He needed me mainly to do all the wiring and electrical installations from scratch. My sister-in-law offered to pay me $5,000 for helping. The floor they had bought was originally a painter's studio and had no rooms. We had to demolish everything and rebuild it into a 2-bedroom apartment with a spacious kitchen, a large bathroom, a living room, and a dining area. After the demolition and helping the contractor remove the debris by truck, bringing it down from the 4th floor, I started running the main wiring from the meter to the new apartment panel. Then, I wired the entire house and completed all the electrical connections. The entire process took about 3 months, and afterward, I returned to Peru with my family. However, my sister-in-law only paid me $2.500 of the agreed amount and then sent me $200 monthly to my bank account. By then, the online Forex or trading business had collapsed because it turned out to be a Ponzi scheme. Initially, I earned enough money to live those 2 years in Lima and support my family, but later, I lost $2,000 in that risky venture. With the $200 my sister-in-law sent me each month, we managed to survive in Lima, as at that time, $300 was enough to cover rent, electricity, water, food, etc. However, I had to be very resourceful to make that money last. I took the $2,500 I had received, and with the additional $200 per month, we managed to survive for another year. Still, I had to look for work in Lima. Through a Cuban man who owned a nightclub, I got a job 3 nights a week for $20 per night. It wasn't enough, but God never abandoned us and provided for us in one way or another. After that year and the birth of my second child, I returned to the US to work, with no money but with the help of my friend Orlando from Miami. He welcomed me into his home for 3 months, which allowed me to avoid paying rent and even food expenses. However, I had to sleep in his room and share his bed with his brother Lionel, another great friend who had always been there to lend me a hand. Meanwhile, my wife and kids had to move to her parents' house outside the capital. Her parents had a small store and bakery in their home. By 2011, after filing my taxes, I received $8,000 in tax credits for my 2 children. Although they were born and lived in Peru, I had registered them at the U.S. Embassy as American citizens born abroad, obtaining their Social Security numbers. Around that time, I also filed a petition for my wife to immigrate to the U.S., which was approved. I then traveled to her parents' house to be with them until her papers arrived so we could travel to the U.S. together. That experience in the central jungle region of Peru lasted 3 months before we traveled to Lima to begin the visa process and complete the required medical checkups at the U.S. Embassy. After a month and a half in Lima, once we had obtained the visa and tickets, we traveled to the U.S., with just $2,000 in our pockets. The hard road to financial freedom. Upon arriving in the U.S., in Hialeah, South Florida, we stayed at Orlando's house for 1 night before moving into a rented room in a Cuban couple's home. At that time, I had nothing, not even a car, but God provided immediately. Someone lent me a minivan for a few days. Then, my wife found a job at a cafe 3 blocks from where we lived. Through the cafe owner, she was able to rent a 3-wheeled motorbike with a kitchen attached for $20 per day to sell hot dogs and shaved ice around the city. That venture, however, wasn't very successful. She could only sell in the mornings, making less than $100 daily. After paying the $20 rental fee and gas, she was left with $80 or sometimes only $60. But at least it helped us get by. Once our $2,000 in savings ran out after 2 months, we decided to rent a car and move to Houston, Texas. A Cuban pastor friend had invited us to live with him, offering us his home and car for as long as needed so we could settle and help each other. I hesitated before making this move, but considering our situation and finances, I had no other choice. Although my pastor friend had the best intentions, sometimes people make offers they can't keep or later change their minds. My biggest concern was that he and his wife had only been in the U.S. for a short time and didn't fully understand the realities of living here. They had been fortunate to cross the border, legalize their status, and be received by their son, who had already settled in Houston. They didn't have to pay rent or buy a car since one had been gifted to them, so they didn't have to spend their savings. Our situation was different. I had no family to rely on. I never asked anyone for help, even when I struggled. I accepted assistance when offered, but I disliked borrowing or owing anyone. When we arrived in Houston by road in a rented Ford Explorer, we stayed in the pastor's son's apartment. He had just moved to a bigger place with his family. Because they were Cuban refugees, they received housing assistance and other benefits. However, since it was a low-income apartment complex managed by a company, we were given a notice within a week stating that we had to leave or renew the lease. Since we were not on the lease, we had to pay rent and a deposit like any other tenant. This forced me into debt because they had to cover the initial costs for us, as I hadn't even started working in Houston yet and had no savings left. This is why I was reluctant to move to Texas, a completely unknown state where, despite good intentions, our hosts were not well informed about life in the U.S. As I mentioned before, I dislike owing money and prefer to live within my means. The pastor's son's apartment was just a few steps away from where the pastor and his wife lived in the same complex. A few days after arriving, using the pastor's car, since he didn't work or need it, I found a job at a rice packing factory. The job was far from home, and I needed a car to get there. The pastor had initially promised to let me use his car indefinitely, but after a week of working at the factory, he took it back, saying he needed it, and never lent it to me again. This is why I struggle to trust promises and offers from people who later change their minds or commit to things they can't fulfill. Thankfully, I wasn't unemployed for long. Within a week, I applied for a maintenance job at an apartment complex, and the owner called me. He offered me a place to live and a job fixing electrical violations noted by an inspector. Without hesitation, seeing this as a blessing from God, we moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in the southwest of Houston. Out of all my work experience, this was the best one. I didn't need a car to commute because I lived where I worked. I could eat lunch at home every day and didn't waste time traveling back and forth. Despite some stressful and demanding days, as in any job, I never complained. I worked as an electrician but also learned how to repair refrigerators and stoves, which was a daily task. Occasionally, I did some plumbing, carried materials, and installed vinyl flooring, making this job a valuable learning experience. My employer deducted rent, utilities, and a company-provided cell phone from my salary. After 2 or 3 months, he raised my pay from $11 to $12 per hour, allowing me to move into a 2-bedroom apartment within the same complex. Although rent was slightly higher, paying $700 for a 2-bedroom unit with all utilities included, electricity, water, internet, cable, and phone, was a great deal from 2011 to 2013. The pastor who had offered me his home and car asked me to speak with the owner to get his son a job. I did so, but the owner required him to move into one of his units. Since the young man was married with a daughter and living comfortably in his new apartment, he neither could nor wanted to move there. I insisted with the owner so much that he finally agreed to hire him to repair all the damaged railings in the buildings. His job was supposed to be temporary, but he ended up staying permanently as the only employee who did not live on site. Later, 2 more recently arrived Cuban men, acquaintances of the pastor's son, also joined the staff, but they did move into the complex. Since I was one of the few employees who spoke English, the owner asked me to be an interpreter and supervisor. However, one of those newly arrived Cubans and the pastor's son started doing whatever they wanted instead of what they were instructed to do. The pastor's son would take the other guy with him to work or wander around without actually doing the tasks assigned to them. Because of this, the owner asked me to inform the new guy that he was fired. The guy got angry with me as if I were the one firing him. Meanwhile, the pastor's son continued to do as he pleased, ignoring warnings. After several warnings, he was finally fired. This time, I approached him with the phone on the speaker to translate what the owner was saying to him, word for word. The young man got angry and insulted us. This was the only bitter experience I had in that place. After securing jobs for these people and insisting that they be hired, especially the pastor's son, who refused to move into the complex, this is how they repaid me. I even defended him in a dispute he had with another employee, and after that, this was the gratitude I received. Not only did the pastor's son ignore his job responsibilities and spend most of his time in the office talking to the receptionist, but he also started watching me closely to report to the office that I wasn't working. On top of that, he told another employee that I still owed him money for the apartment he had paid for due to his own mistake and empty promises. He claimed I hadn't fully repaid him. At the time, I hadn't yet saved enough to buy a car, given my low salary and the expenses of supporting a family of 4 after just 3 or 4 months of living in Houston. Yet, he was gossiping about me owing him money. I paid him back as soon as I could. After 6 months of working and living there, the owner gave me a car, deducting $1,500 plus taxes from my biweekly paycheck for a 2000 Toyota Corolla. By then, he had already raised my hourly wage by another $1, allowing me to continue covering my regular expenses. After about a year and a half in Houston, working in that place, my son developed asthma. Every night, he suffered from a persistent cough that prevented him from sleeping and made breathing difficult. I had to take him to the doctor every week, and he was under treatment and on oxygen. This situation forced me to consider leaving Houston and Texas altogether. Houston is a polluted city due to the oil extraction plants in the Gulf, and even though it is 2 hours away from the Gulf of Mexico, the air quality is toxic. The climate is also harsh, with drastic temperature changes during the 8-month-long winter, fluctuating from 70 degrees Fahrenheit to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, combined with extreme humidity. I reached out to a friend in Miami, whom I had met while working as an electrician. By that time, he had his own electrical service company and invited me to work with him. He even offered me a work van but could only pay me $11 per hour. Life in South Florida is significantly more expensive than in Houston, Texas, and in 2012, $11 an hour was not enough to support a family. However, my main concern was my 3-year-old son's health, and I had to act quickly, so I accepted the offer. I contacted a Cuban friend I had met in Houston, who had also worked at the apartment complex where I was employed. He had since moved to Miami and was living in a multi-family house by a lake. He offered me his room while he slept in the living room so that we could help each other until I found a place of my own. I sold my Toyota Corolla and bought a Ford F-150 truck to transport as much as possible. The truck bed only had enough space for a washer and dryer, a bunk bed, some toys, and our clothes. I wrapped everything in a tarp and tied it down securely to prevent the wind from blowing away on the road. Once again, we embarked on a 2-day journey to Miami. This time, we stayed overnight in Tallahassee before continuing the next morning. During my previous trip from Miami to Houston, I had only stopped to eat and refuel because I had rented the Ford Explorer for just 24 hours and couldn't afford to sleep. When we arrived, we settled in as best as we could, and I started working the next day. We made every effort to find an apartment or at least a separate room, as I didn't want to stay permanently in my friend's efficiency. However, things had changed in Miami and throughout South Florida. Finding an apartment without a 2-year rental and work history in the city was extremely difficult. I wasted money on applications, deposits, and time, only to realize that I wouldn't be approved. After 6 months, my friend had to move out, leaving us behind. I couldn't find another efficiency like the one we were staying in because landlords refused to rent to couples with children. However, the homeowner agreed to let us stay, without a contract or deposit, since I had been the one paying the rent for those 6 months while my friend hadn't. After a year and a half, when we were finally comfortable living alone in that small apartment by the lake, something we fully enjoyed, the landlord informed me that he had sold the house, and we had to move out within the month. The cunning man had already completed the sale but only informed me after collecting that month's rent. He gave me only 15 days to leave. I told him I couldn't just leave with my family on such short notice, as I had nowhere to go, and no money saved for a sudden move. By law, he was supposed to give me at least 3 months' notice. The man pleaded with me and eventually refunded my rent. With only $1,500, I first went to look for housing in Tampa, Central West Florida, where I had lived for several years and knew the area well. I figured it would be easier to find an affordable rental there. By June 2013, my friend, with whom I had lived in Miami and who had to leave because I couldn't find a place to move, had relocated to Tampa with his brother. He once again offered me a room in his brother's house, which had been prepared for his daughter, who was moving from another state but had not yet arrived. I stayed there for just 3 days before finding a 2-bedroom apartment and getting the keys. Without wasting time, I went back to Miami to pick up my wife and 2 children, who had stayed behind waiting. Work wasn't a problem because I always secured a job online before making such a big move. During my 3 days in Tampa, I had already attended an interview and was hired for $16 an hour. After a year in that apartment, the rent suddenly increased by $200, so I thought, if I'm going to pay that much, I might as well move into a 3-bedroom apartment. So, we started looking again and found a 3-bedroom apartment in South Tampa for $850. At that time, it was a great deal impossible to find today, 8 years later. Once we were well established and comfortable with 3 bedrooms, where each child had their own room, I faced another challenge, my health. Since my time in Miami, I have been dealing with severe back pain. By 2016, I could no longer work a full shift. I jumped from company to company because I couldn't meet the 40-hour workweek, leading to me either quitting or getting fired. In 2017, I underwent surgery for herniated discs, but it didn't fully resolve my pain or chronic fatigue, which I still suffer from today. That year, my wife found a part-time night job, which she still has today as a full-time position. From 2016 to 2017, life was tough because I wasn't earning much or generating income. This situation forced me to find ways to make money without depending on a salaried job. I had been preparing an electrician training course since 2014 and, by 2016, had completed the study materials. That year, I also started publishing books for other authors as a business. Eventually, I was able to sustain my household, and my wife's job provided additional relief. By 2020, during the pandemic, we even managed to buy a house. These experiences have been a continuous fresh start for me. When single, it's easier to move and make drastic changes, but when you have a family, decisions must be carefully thought out, especially when raising small children. Mission accomplished. In my book How to Turn Difficulties into Opportunities, I share part of this story, along with the principles and advice for building family well-being by overcoming obstacles and seizing opportunities. As I mentioned before, it took me 40 years to achieve the financial freedom I enjoy today, without needing a large amount of capital to do so. Freedom and abundance are two different things. One can be wealthy or upper middle class but still be a slave to a business or the assets one must manage. On the other hand, one can be free without having a large amount of capital or even any savings. Regardless of your situation, you must enjoy what you do, with passion, humility, perseverance, and resilience. You must be willing to take risks, learn from mistakes and failures, never lose sight of your vision, stay focused, and take action. If you don't take a step of faith, you will never move from where you are. If you seek financial independence and want to be the owner of your life and time, you don't have to wait 40 years like I did. Although I made several attempts and achieved temporary results, I learned from my mistakes and failures. Most importantly, I learned to get back up and keep going, even starting over multiple times in my life, without borrowing money from anyone. The only financial help I took was assisting my wife in building her credit to buy our house. The debts we have now pay themselves effortlessly, as we have 2 rental units on our property listed on Airbnb. These rentals cover all our expenses and debts. Our savings are used for special expenses, purchases, travel, and vacations. We are currently waiting for the right moment to invest in another property when the real estate bubble bursts. In the meantime, I am planning to buy another RV, motorhome, for rental purposes, but I will need to find a place to park it and pay for the lot rental. Even if that investment only earns me $500 a month, that's an extra $500 with no additional effort other than collecting the rent, which amounts to $6,000 per year. Compared to the other 2 rental units, including the RV I currently rent out on Airbnb, it's a smaller profit, but at least I don't have to pay extra to keep it on my property. I have fulfilled my mission in life. I am leaving a legacy for my children. I hope they don't lose it because their future depends entirely on them. If they follow my advice and replicate what I have taught them and how we have lived, they will succeed. My 12-year-old son, who doesn't like school, is already learning about how to generate money. I bought him 5 books by Robert Kiyosaki, a financial expert and author of several books on the subject, so he can apply those lessons in life. My goal is for him to follow my example and carve his own path, not necessarily doing what I did but embracing the entrepreneurial mindset I am teaching him so that he doesn't have to depend on an employer, wages, or full-time, overtime, or part-time jobs. I teach him to focus on what he does, calculate his finances wisely, and analyze any business venture carefully, who he partners with, whether the investment is safe and profitable, and whether it requires a large amount of capital that could leave him in debt, as has happened to many people. I want him to learn as much as possible and enjoy doing it because the more skills and trades one master, the less one depends on others, and the more others depend on your services. For now, I don't take him to work with me, but I let him handle tasks on his own, like assembling things we buy, fixing minor issues, or simply observing how I do things. I encourage him to invest in Bitcoin and to buy and resell items on eBay using my accounts. However, we are waiting for the right moment for him to start. Investing in cryptocurrencies, digital currency, or the stock market is risky, even though it can be profitable. I have not personally invested in the stock market, though I have nothing against it since many people have been successful in it. However, I always advise investing through a mutual fund, a long-term investment, to minimize risk and ensure that after 10 years or more, the investment yields good returns. If one continues to contribute to the fund over time, the potential return can reach $1 million or more. Ultimately, time flies, and the key is to stay alive, healthy, and patient enough to reap the rewards with interest. My 14-year-old daughter, on the other hand, is more focused on studying and pursuing a career. She is passionate about volleyball, and enjoys spending time with friends, or simply staying at home. I don't talk to her much about investments, although I do encourage her to read Kiyosaki's books as well. If you have young children, teenagers, or grandchildren, don't hesitate to teach them everything you can: finance, management, politics, ethics, and morality. The younger they are, the better they absorb knowledge and remember what they have been taught. At some point in their lives, after facing their own struggles, they will decide to follow your advice. Prepare them for the future, and they will do the same for their children and grandchildren. It is written, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Proverbs 22 verse 6. Other books I have written on finance and business. The Path to Financial Freedom. In Search for Financial Freedom. Be financially free starting today. How to Turn Difficulties into Opportunities. Money Doesn't Exist. The End of This Book. Book created by Baute Production in Tampa, Florida, United States of America. Phone, 813-693-8879. The author's biography. Milco Baute Lopez, a Cuban writer, editor, and educator, has woven a fascinating trajectory over the decades. His pen, infused with passion and creativity, has been a beacon of knowledge and artistic expression since 1992, when he began enlightening the world with his insightful articles. The most significant chapter of his life was written on December 10, 1995, when Milco crossed borders and oceans to settle in the United States. This land of opportunities became his new home, and in 2001, with a profound sense of belonging, he embraced U.S. citizenship, merging his Cuban roots with his love for cultural diversity. The pursuit of knowledge and wisdom has always been a constant in Milco's life. This passionate autodidact, eager to nourish his intellect, embarked on a remarkable academic journey. He studied philosophy through an online course offered by the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and in 2016, he successfully completed his academic journey, becoming a graduate of this venerable institution. Milco Baute is not only an accomplished writer but also a prolific author. From 2008 to the present, he has given life to more than 100 books, showcasing his literary talent in both English and Spanish. In addition to his personal work, Milco plays a pivotal role in the publishing industry as an editor, writer, and distributor, collaborating with other authors to bring their stories to the world. One cannot fully grasp the rich palette of Milco's experiences without mentioning his technical background as a graduate in Cuba in 1986 as a technician in electrical power systems. This distinguished profession led him to practice his craft with skill for over 2 decades before his passion for writing and education led him down new paths. In summary, the life of Milco Baute Lopez is a symphony of creativity, perseverance, and dedication. His journey from the Cuban shores to the borders of the United States, through academic exploration and prolific literary production, is a testament to his unwavering spirit and commitment to cultural enrichment and knowledge in all its forms.